They're basically underdeveloped children. They're little children, just never grew up. They can be intellectually very smart, strategically very, very clever. But they're very underdeveloped. At a certain point, they stop growing and they just give in to a whole bunch of impulses.
Danny started to hang out with Keith.
You familiar with Led Zeppelin? This is more of a dissonant version for cymbals.
What I realize in watching the Led Zeppelin thing is what I'm actually looking at with Raniere, now I see with different eyes, is basically a college kid who's trying to impress somebody with all the stuff he knows. But he's a little boy. He's like never grown up. And that's a lot of the reframing that occurred for me, you know, as I began defragging my own hard drive, is realizing, oh, this guy's a little boy. He got stuck, you know, at college age. I actually think maybe he got stuck earlier, but you really see that he's stuck in college age. I mean, the way he's lying around on the couch, the way that, you know, all the papers piled up, it's a mess. It's like a college dorm, and he's still living in college. You know, he just wanted to create college around him.
I have very good footage of like tennis or volleyball or like, you know, things like that.
But like, you don't have me jumping over someone. How did I look going over the people?
Really nice.
Do you feel like a supermodel yet?
I like the way you opened that cereal, Keith.
Yeah.
The rest of the world will appreciate it as well.
You don't have to film the whole time. You can put it down.
Yeah, I could. No, never. I'm actually zooming in at the moment.
It'd be good if you had several cameras. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
When Raniere and Daniela are roughhousing in the gym, and he throws her on the ground and he does this handstand, you know, over her. Again, it makes me think as I look at this, and I don't remember ever having seen that footage. I think this was the first time I'd seen it. When he's doing the handstand over her, I see it now for what it is. What it is a little boy showing off to somebody he likes or somebody he's infatuated with. And a lot of those kinds of things happened in all the years I was there. But I just saw it as like, well, he's just being playful. He's just like, despite his incredible mind, he's just being a down-to-earth guy. And now I'm saying, no. What's going on is he's like a teenager trying to impress all the young ladies. That's what's actually going on here.
I remember all of a sudden Mariana and Daniela were talking about bringing their sister and their brother, Adrian and Camilla, to Albany as well. Apparently, Keith thought it would be a good idea for the whole family to be together here. Keith would give people what he called affectionate nicknames. Camilla's nickname was VC. I never knew what it was.
Did you ever hear the defendant say anything sexual in front of your sister, Camilla?
Yes. He would make sexual jokes. And he used to tease her about her innocent demeanor. He even nicknamed her Virgin Camila.
Camilla was in her early 20s when these messages were exchanged. But they had already had sexual contact for years.
On August 24th, Raniere writes, "Are you free?"
Not now, but can be soon. Till when are you free?
4. Small risk around 2 of your sister.
I'm waiting to wish you a happy birthday.
I love you so. When can you sneak away so I can taste you? I've had a few offers for my birthday, but I've been intentionally saving it for you. I want you.
So, Camilla, you like disappear. Haven't heard from you. You don't send flowers, candies, no nothing. Are you in a better state? So
How'd you keep? Oh, wonderful. It was so good because I was just, I had a dance instructor ask me.
I thought a lot about you and about us today.
And?
All of me loves you. But I feel you as a parent, as a god.
Your belief of unsafety with me is the real problem. In this specific case, you should want to give your god everything. Certainly more than you would have ever given Robbie. Why are you still protecting what you did with Robbie? Why won't you face this in yourself so things can get better?
I don't have the answers you are looking for. I'm sorry.
He is shorter and thinner, penis-wise?
Longer, but thinner.
Is he longer when I'm fully hard?
Probably about the same.
I know his penis is 6.75 fully erect and mine is 7.5, so I'm looking at how you are slanting things.
What the fuck? How do you know that?
Maybe someday I'll tell you, but guys know things about each other.
The whole penis discussion about the length of Robbie's penis, you know, blah, blah, blah. When I first heard that, I was like, you know, are you fucking serious? That's who we've been following? A fucking child? You know, and when he says to her, you know, when she says, how do you know? And he says, well, guys tell each other. No, they fucking don't tell each other shit. They barely have a fucking meaningful conversation with each other. That's fucking bullshit. He's just trying to make her think that he's somehow smarter and that guys have this, you know, secret language. They do not have the secret fucking language. Guys actually know less about each other than women know about each other. Far less. You know, I just keep on going back to these text messages. They were so important because the exchanges between Camilla and Fuckface, you can clearly see this man is deranged and has an obsessive and violent need for control. And it's so contrary to what everybody believed about him. That's why these messages were so important. It was such a big shock when these messages started coming out in 2018 in the government filings, because it was so contrary to what people believed. And for me, although I had begun to take him off the pedestal and realized who he was, it just further sort of concretized my understanding that what I had been following was you know, a complete fucking mask. That underneath it, this was the truth. And this is what people have to understand. Underneath these abusers, there is a truth that maybe you can't see because maybe their pathology and the way they've trained themselves to hide these things so well.
How many attractive, not socially defective virgins would give their life to someone like me at my age?
You are handsome, sexy, strong, gentle, loving, funny, talented. What woman wouldn't want that?
Even an inexperienced 18-year-old?
Even an inexperienced 15-year-old.
And I allude again to politics because this is, I believe, what politicians do. How many times have you heard about some leader or some politician who everybody thinks is like, you know, the next, you know, next thing to God, and you find out that he's diddling God knows who, underage whatever, and that's the truth. You know, I refer you again to every single scandal about a leader, and many of these scandals haven't come out, but hopefully people will start to see under the mask more and more in all kinds of contexts. When, you know, in the vow, you see we go off to India to go meet the Dalai Lama. Myself, Nancy Salzman, Sarah Bronfman, and Keith Raniere went to Dharamsala. And so I went to document the whole meeting.
Which way?
And I remember we took like we drove in the middle of the night to like a private airstrip somewhere near Saratoga Springs, and we took a private jet to New York, and then from New York we flew to like Heathrow, and then from Heathrow to India. And I remember because I was, with Raniere and a few other people, he couldn't do anything. He couldn't handle his passport. He couldn't handle his ticket. It's like he'd never gone through TSA in his life. And he was like a little boy. And me, with my, sweetness, was like, oh, that's so sweet. He's like a little monk that has no real life experience. He's so internal and so like loving and trying to figure out how to help people. And he doesn't have a lot of experience. He barely ever drove himself. I mean, sometimes if I'd meet him, sometimes I'd have to drive him, I'd have to go pick him up, And later I was like, motherfucker, he used to fly. He just organized his life in such a way that he was so helpless.
Keith, Mariana, and I were just hanging out in Flintlock. And then Keith wanted to take a nap with the both of us. He brought us upstairs, and we laid down. All of a sudden, he's like kissing her and touching me. It felt dirty. It was wrong. So I start crying. Then Mariana starts crying. Like, really messed up crying. And eventually, he stopped.
And how old were you at that point?
I was 16.
I had a conversation with my daughter recently who explained to me that the only time that Keith Raniere ever enjoyed any kind of sexual relationship was when there was something a little bit depraved about it. And I said, what do you mean? And she said to me, like, when you went away on vacation, he used to love to have sex all over your house. And you wouldn't know. He would love that sort of thing. Or it had to be a threesome, or it had to be some kind of off thing. It's very sad. Like, I had a whole life before I met Keith. Like a whole normal, traditional life. The thing that saddens me is the women in Lauren's generation who spent their whole 20s and 30s with Keith, promising them things, and never had an experience with the real world. When I got here, they were all fighting over who was going to get the special babies from Keith. Like, he promised Barbara, Pam, and Karen babies. They had names for them. Like, I mean, they really believed they existed. I found out little by little all the women didn't have babies because Keith made them think that they could have babies like anytime. And they were all in their 40s and almost 50. One of the women had been on the pill because she had skin problems, and she went off the pill and found out she'd been through menopause and didn't know it, and was still thinking she was going to get pregnant and have a baby. It was crazy.
When Nancy Salzman says that the women in their 20s and 30s who spent time with Keith, and they were promised things that and they never had an experience of the real world, that is exactly true. Many of them lost their childbearing years, but the thing is, he kept them all like little children. You heard at one point, Lauren talks about her upset at Mariana having the baby. So Mariana and Pam were around Keith Raniere all the time, and they were like little children. They were women, grown women, but they were like little children. And many of the people, I mean, cults in general arrest your fucking development. But I do find that the women around him were kept like little children. And also the diet he had them on gave them sort of these androgynous prepubescent bodies. I think he wanted prepubescent bodies. So he was doing things to their mind to arrest them. And then he was also meaning development, and then also forcing them to eat certain things that would keep them looking like children. Very androgynous, not looking like women.
One night in volleyball, I was excited and roughhousing, and I jumped on another male NXIVM member. He said I straddled him and that I communicated that I was open to having relationships with other men, and that I had really disrespected him. Keith said I committed an ethical breach. When there was a breach, you would humble yourself and make a commitment and plan to fix it. So I stayed home for a whole weekend, and I came up with a very involved 7-page plan.
I'm showing you Government Exhibit 1497. Can you read the text of that email?
I'm so sorry, Keith. I'm perceived as easy or available for a relationship, or viewed as jumping from man to man, so not taken seriously. This degrades me, and also sets a bad example in the organization, and reflects poorly on Keith and his choice to be with me or have a child with me. I damage the way others will view, relate with, and treat our child. So I'm hurting someone who doesn't even exist yet.
Once you've done an ethical breach and now you feel uncomfortable about it, you carry that forward with you into every other action and every decision. Because healing the breach is cleaning up the effects that you did, but it's also learning to make decisions differently.
Keith said it was a pattern, that the way I relate with men disrespected our relationship.
When Raniere says that Lauren disrespected him by jumping on another guy at volleyball, it just makes me think about what a shallow little fucking ego this guy has. Fucking midget. And that became her ethical breach. And listen, there were a whole bunch of things like this. There was another person, I'm not going to mention his name, but who began a relationship with somebody that Raniere had his eye on. And Raniere basically said this guy had an ethical breach. And for the entire time that I was in ESP, this guy was always given shit because of this ethical breach that I didn't know what it was. And I would ask. I even asked Raniere, what is his ethical breach? He goes, well, that's for me to know, kind of shit, But basically, as I said before, ethical breaches were basically, if he had a bad reaction to something, he didn't have the fucking courage or actually the brain capacity to admit it. So he would turn it into some weird reason.
Now, Daniela, at some point you had a falling out with the defendant, correct?
Yes, in 2006. I started hanging out with a fellow student at ESP. One night, after a community event, I think the slang word is, we made out. I told Keith. Keith was angry. I had never seen him angry before, and it was dramatic. There was no reasoning with him. It was this huge fight. He said I wasn't pure anymore, that I had destroyed everything, and that this was an ethical breach for me. He locked himself up in the bathroom, and then he went upstairs, so I chased him into Pam's room. He grabbed me by the arm and threw me over onto a mattress on the floor and ran out. And that was the end of the argument. My life changed completely overnight. I couldn't be anywhere Keith was, which meant I couldn't go to volleyball or any community events whatsoever. It was like an immediate shunning.
When Daniela makes out with this guy, who I actually know, who was a dear friend of mine, and Raniere stops talking to her and has all these reasons why she's breached, The thing about it, again, he's having a big fucking tantrum. And he's saying, these are all the actual reasons why, why you've done this bad thing. And that's what he would do all the time. He'd have a tantrum and then explain it away with reasons from the education. And so, in the case of Daniela and anybody else who'd been, ethical breachized, they they started to believe that they had done something problematic, and now they were struggling to figure out how to make it right. But the way Raniere's behaving is like a little boy whose mother showed affection to somebody else and he had a freak out. That's kind of what this is the equivalent of, him getting upset that she made out with somebody. Like when he locks himself in the bathroom and he freaks out. And, all the text messages between him and some of the women were very, very juvenile. I mean, really juvenile. Him being upset about, you slept with so-and-so, or is his penis bigger than mine? I mean, really, really juvenile stuff. I mean, he was having major, major meltdowns, apparently running into the bathroom quite a few times. And then always, making himself sick or acting as though he was terribly sick from this terrible thing that they had done to his spiritual being.
He had so many women, he had to balance all the time. It became harder to get people into these commitments. Like with Lauren, he had to promise her constantly that he was coming back, that they were going to have a baby, all of these things. And I think he created DOS maybe as a way of getting them to have this vow that they would never leave.
When Nancy talks about the idea that Raniere maybe created DOS to make sure that the women would never leave, it's true. What eventually happened, I think, is because Raniere has major abandonment issues. And when people would leave, he would try to litigate them into destruction. That's one thing he would try and do. But I think that he had such an obsession with being abandoned that he had to create a structure that would make sure he would never be abandoned. The entire thing was designed to keep people there because of his fucked up psychological issues. His vulnerability was why DOS and all these things were created. There was this constant, every time anybody went away, like when I went away, Nancy was always like, oh, well, how long are you going for? And I'd come back, she goes, welcome home. And I'd be like, I don't feel like this is home. But this obsession constantly with like, come home, come home, come home. And like, we're family, we're family. It's the usual cult things. But it escalated with, ethicist and collateral and more discussions about breaches. And then DOS was the perfect system to prevent him being left. And that's what I believe we're dealing with is huge abandonment issues. Raniere may not have a lot of emotions, but that emotion, the fear of abandonment, he definitely does have.
I feel my entire person depends on you. It is very scary and suffocating. I feel like your puppet.
I don't know what to say. I need a convincing apology, proof you understand, and a vow. You have damaged me. Cut the victim stuff.
Camilla writes, what do you want me to do? And he writes, trust me 100%. Any failure is unacceptable. You have to earn me. I need a vow of absolute obedience. Camilla writes, I can't do it, love. Please don't be mad. And then he writes, if I don't get what I want you out. Camilla writes, I'm fearful that you will abuse the power. And he writes, if it never seemed questionable, it wouldn't be trust. Do it now. Camilla says, I vow to do as you say. And now he wants her to be his slave. So he came up with this idea in 2014, I guess. This is the beginning of DOS, I guess.
What do you want in a slave?
Shorter than me, younger than you, but would have to prove herself through obedience.
As in slave-type obedience?
Yes, but in other ways too. Wink, wink. I think it would be good for you to own a fuck toy slave that you could groom and use to pleasure me.
Huh? A person? I'm not turned on by owning.
Maybe I'll command you, my dearest little fuck toy slave.
Having those communications where he actually says to Camilla that she should be grooming someone for him. These were very key facts and key evidence to proving our case. The WhatsApp chats really gave the jury insight into this point in time where Keith Raniere is losing control over the women in his life. He had experienced what had happened with Daniela already. Now he had Camilla, who he thought would never betray him, had had a sexual experience with another man. And DOS provided this way of keeping that control.
Moira Penza is extremely accurate when she talks about DOS being the thing that allows him to finally control all the women. Because he had been losing control of people, people had been leaving, and he needed a way to guarantee that he would never be abandoned. It was a cage to help him with his own insecurity, stuff that he had never resolved and maybe isn't capable of resolving. I'm not sure what's actually going on in his psyche, but clearly, you know, as a 50-something, 60 whatever guy, I mean, he hasn't resolved this shit in all that time. So chances are it's never getting resolved. We're dealing with a very, very needy man. These kinds of leaders are very, very needy. They act as though they don't need anybody, but it's not true. They're super fucking needy. And once you figure that out, it really frees you when you realize, oh, motherfucker's just needy and doesn't know how to like just be a human being, so is forcing people and coercing people to do shit to deal with his neediness.